Babar, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, so we were just getting into it a little bit. So I was like, let me throw on the recorder so you don't have to repeat yourself 100 times. So I think a good question to start things out with is, how would you describe the advertising and media landscape in Pakistan right now?
Sure. It's a fast growing industry. That being said, it's quite small. What Salesforce spends in a year, so Salesforce, the company, spends more in its own B2B advertising in a year than the entire Pakistan spends as well. So it's about $2 billion media spending across above the line and below the line. About 15% of that is digital. So that's about $300 million, of which it is pretty much evenly split between Google and Facebook. And so we're still a very much ATL oriented market. We still have a large audience base that is TV driven. We have 200 million people in the country, of which only 80 million have access to a smart device. And even within those smart devices, not all of them have access to something like a YouTube or Netflix and all those other things. So primarily the TV, the media consumption happens on television, print, and radio. And this also has a big part to play with literacy. So if your literacy rate is low, but everyone speaks a certain language, then they'll consume it from an audio and a visual perspective than they would from a reading perspective, because there's an educational barrier to accessing a smart device, and then from there building an account and putting in your information. So if you don't know how to read and write, then you're unable to make an account on any of these apps, right? But if you're just able to understand by listening or by hearing someone speak on TV, then that content absorption is much more seamless. And so that's where the market is right now. And then we have a few advertisers in the FMCG and the telco space that are on the client side. And then with the media agency side, there's hardly 15 media agencies in the whole country, of which 2 control almost 50% of the market. And those are Group M, the WPP Media Investment Company. And the second one is called Starcom, which is under the Publicis Group. Starcom exists in the market through an affiliate deal with a company called Z2C. And so it's in a way, it's a very fast growing market, but it's in the hands of a few vested interests. But that being said, a lot of Chinese apps are coming into the country and taking away a lot of the eyeballs towards their own apps. And so there's a huge shift taking place from the media spend perspective and from the eyeballs perspective. And a lot of the rating agencies are pointing that out to advertisers as well, and media agencies as well, that according to our latest audience measurement data, TV viewership is dipping and apps viewership is skyrocketing. Unfortunately or fortunately, the apps in question are TikTok. The 3 Chinese apps. One is the most famous one called TikTok. The second one is called Likey, and the third one is called Bigo. So these and one more is called Snack Video. These are the 4 apps that are just eating the like an FMCG space. They use the word share of throat. The eyeball mind share from the masses, what we call SECCDE, are just gravitating at exponential rates towards these apps, and that's where the opportunity lies right now. In I would say figuring out which of those apps where they play a role in the buyer decision journey, or in the funnel of the buyer, from awareness all the way down to conversion. And more we're seeing that these apps created by these Chinese companies are playing a massive role at the bottom of the funnel. And so a lot of advertisers are looking at them. While they're very skeptical in the beginning, they're like, I don't know if I want to spend my money on TikTok. They're also seeing that TikTok has created an in-app monetization model, so that the creator, the influencer within the app, is compensated for actually driving commercial results, both by the platform and by the advertiser as well. And so people are looking at this and saying that this is like getting a home shopping channel, but within your own, within the palm of your hand. And so transactions are much more instantaneous. So that's the most crux version of it. I don't know if you want to hear about TV, print, or radio, but on the digital side, that's where the opportunity is right now, to focus on the influencer and MTN space.
Yeah, there's a lot of places we could go, and that's super interesting. I guess just to give a little more context, I'd love to hear how things have changed. I'm not sure how old you are, but how do you remember the advertising and media and just kind of broadcast space from growing up versus what it's like now in Pakistan?
I can't speak that much about growing up because I primarily grew up in the Middle East and primarily in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and UAE. I did my university education from Pakistan,
Mhm.
and what I've seen over the years is that the TV, the broadcasters basically controlled a solid amount of the market, and they still do, in the sense that they in the West, right, in the West right now, if I have a show that's airing on NBC, it's very unlikely that NBC, the distributor of that show, is also owning the production company of the same show. But we don't have those laws in Pakistan. We don't have a single regulator in the country that concerns with the broadcaster associations or that concerns with the advertising industry. We have some. I mean, if you speak to the other people in the industry, they'll say that we have a regulator for the broadcasters and the agencies, but I'm talking about in terms of actions. Having that regulator be present and having them actually enforce some rules, there's a gigantic difference between the two. So in a way, when there's no regulator, you can go all out and capture the entire market and do all kinds of underhanded things to capitalize yourself. And so what I've seen over the course of the last decade has been that broadcasters have gone from understanding that they have lost the control of the audience. They've lost the ability to manipulate ratings. In the past, there was three broadcast companies, primarily on TV, print, radio, that were able to pay off. It's no secret that Pakistan has a pretty bad corruption index score and a pretty bad ease of doing business score. And I would say a decade ago, these three broadcast organizations were able to pay off replicas of Nielsen and replicas of Kantar and tell them that, you need to give us the highest possible ratings in the top three category in terms of audience consumption. But now it's with digital, with Google Analytics, with Facebook Analytics, and all these other sort of free to use analytical tools that show you audience growth and all that, the advertiser is being pressured to come to terms with the idea, the possibility that the data that they're getting on TV consumption does not reflect the reality. And on top of that, the top rating agency in Pakistan that covers the measurement of TV audience consumption has a sample size of 2,000 households, and it's a 200 million people country. That's not even 1%. So on the one hand, you have tools such as Google and Facebook. I'm giving those as the prime examples, but obviously we have many others that show you that, hey, I've got a daily active user rate of 30 million people. I'm going to show you data on all 30 million of them, as opposed to showing you data on 10,000 of them who hopefully represent the rest of the sample, or a sample representative of the entire group. So because of these kind of open and transparent data analytics tools, people are starting to realize that this old way we've been doing things, that's not really necessary anymore, or that's not really relevant anymore. We should expect our TV, our ATL mediums to apply the same measurement as we're seeing on the digital side. And that's where the industry is moving right now. If I speak to any marketer, I speak with advertisers on a daily basis, and more the focus has been that we'd like to stop spending money on TV, print, radio. And the only reason we're doing it is because media agencies that we deal with have a very strong rebate relationship with those media inventory types. Otherwise, even the media agencies say, I would love to stop spending money on these archaic, one-way communications mediums, and divert it somewhere else. It's just that because of the way our business model is made up, we have to give them some business so they can give us some kickbacks and some rebates at the back end of that, because the client is not paying a retainer. The client is not willing to pay for efficiency or precision of the targeting and the messaging and all that. So as a result of the client cutting our when we send out an invoice saying, or we send out a proposal saying we'd like to charge you $5,000 a month or whatever the fee is, and we'll take 15% and we'll take extra money for spending it efficiently. When the client is saying, I don't want any of these things, then the media agency has no choice but to go into the rebate and commission model with the media inventory. And so broadcasters are paying the good amounts. That being said, with all these analytics tools that I just mentioned, Google Analytics and Facebook is the most prevalent in Pakistan. Where the market is going is people have seen a relationship between spending their money for the first time, quantifiable relationship between putting their money into a medium and getting a sales result out of that. Now, that being said, when COVID happened, to the whole world last year, and all the stores and all that had to shut down. The arrogant retail businesses in Pakistan that used to say that retail is everything and e-commerce is nothing, they switched gears, obviously, because e-commerce was their only source of revenue, whereas retail was shut down and no one could physically visit the stores. They are cognizant of the fact that while spending money on digital media has brought back sales, they recognize the difference between sales that is discounted versus full price. So the hype train isn't all there. I mean, the hype train.
Yeah, just before we get into e-commerce and stuff, it's super interesting. Like the archaic model, it reminds me of like kind of the old like Soviet adage. We pretend to do work, they pretend to pay us. That sort of thing, where it's like we pretend we're getting results, and they pretend that they're paying for agency expertise when it's just this sort of merry-go-round. So I'd love to hear like what's from that old model, like what was the effect for the consumer, for the viewer, like what sort of art or what kind of like programming would come out of that sort of model in your experience?
Well, in the old days, the programming was very there's a term that we use in the subcontinent. Even like if you're your Indian viewers will also understand this phrase. It's basically the word saas bahu, which means that saas means mother-in-law and bahu means daughter-in-law. So drama after drama, content in terms of what you see on TV, print, radio, about the negative relationship between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and in the context that the daughter-in-law, as she marries she marries a guy, and we only talk about heterosexual relationships in Pakistan. Everything else is taboo. So the story of girl marries guy, she has to move in with his parents, and so the conflict she has with the mother-in-law. That's the only type of storyline that's ever been produced in Pakistan, just because it's safe. It's something that people will definitely gravitate towards, and because they have no choice, they will consume it. That being said, with Netflix, with content piracy, with other types of platforms, YouTube is a prime example of that. People making short videos, and those short videos blowing up overnight about very, I would say high-level concepts, stories about existentialism, stories about the impact of the aftermath impact of war, stories about the I would say the impact of, as you and I obviously know, the negative impact of social media on the mental health of children, especially young girls. When you see these stories explode, then the broadcasters have been freaking out over the past few months, because they're like, there's all this data pointing that people are consuming this other type of content that we have never produced in our lives and we have never intended to produce. And so we have two options. The first option is to be better. And the second option is to lobby to the government that you should shut down these apps because of A, B, and C reason. That's primarily the tactic of the broadcasters right now. And for every app they shut down, 3 more apps show up. And so the government has also come to the conclusion that shutting down these apps to protect the interests of a few archaic businesses that we have in our country doesn't really make sense. Now we need to start working with them. And that was actually the basis of a recent article that I wrote, where I basically told the government in that article that it was an open letter to the media regulator that for every app that you shut down, 3 apps will come on board, 3 other apps will come on board, and those apps will come from random organizations with the only interest of data harvesting, not from the perspective of platform development and user acquisition and creating value for the user. Whereas TikToks and all that, for whatever people say about them, they do create value for the users and the businesses that they serve. So that's where the industry is shifting a bit. But if you have a very specific question about this, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, and thank you for that. So there's all these different apps springing up, and the market is probably going to become more fragmented. Hopefully in a good way. I guess with that, what's the sort of view, and maybe this is getting into bigger kind of foreign policy stuff, but what's the view on China with the Pakistani leadership right now? I know in the US there's been ups and downs with TikTok, so I'd love to hear kind of the overall outlook on various Chinese apps coming in and that sort of thing.
Sure. So Pakistan and China have a very strong relationship over the past, I would say, 4 or 5 decades. It could be longer. I'm not sure. But over the past, I would say, decade, the last two the last 2 prime ministers that we've had from different political parties, they've been on very good terms with China from a trade relationship and other relationships. But then also, that China has the Belt and Road Initiative that they're spanning all over Asia, and Pakistan plays a key role in that. And that initiative within Pakistan is called Cpex. It stands for the letter CPEC. So it stands for China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And so because of that gigantic investment coming in from China to Pakistan, essentially China saying, here's like $15 billion. I'm going to help you build infrastructure inside your country. So commercial activity and transportation and logistics is much more seamless. As a result of that, the Pakistani government is well aware that if we don't like something about a Chinese app, we can't just ban it, because that'll have a very big long-term implications on the relationship. That being said, the national security concerns that the US had with TikTok, pertaining with the idea that TikTok is controlled by the Chinese government, or the supposition that TikTok, because it's the TikTok being owned by ByteDance and ByteDance being based in China, the servers of the users in China might be compromised by getting access by the Chinese Communist Party. And so we don't have those concerns in Pakistan because we have no understanding from a regulatory standpoint and from a general standpoint about data and identity. I mean, to date, if I talk to a digital marketer, someone who calls themselves Google certified in Pakistan, and I talk to them about what is your plan for the third-party cookie depreciation, they don't want to talk about it. They want to keep their clients in the dark. They don't want anyone to acknowledge that this is a problem. So we're at that level where we're choosing, a lot of the industry leaders are choosing to be ignorant about various topics that are highly talked about in the West, and anyone can access that information. It's not like our internet is blocked off. We can't see what's happening on CNN or anything like that. But people are just choose to be ignorant because there's a reluctance to go above and beyond and be a bit too sophisticated. And that also just boils down to the fact that people in the country are living and in 3-month cycles. They're within their own jobs. They're being evaluated on 3-month cycles. So no one thinks beyond the next 12 months, 15 months, 24 months within their organization, let alone in their own lives. So expecting them to think about data privacy or thinking about national security interests and all that doesn't even come into play. So as an example, you talk about the US and China having relationship where, and it's two ways, right? I mean, the US banned TikTok, but if you flip the other side, China doesn't allow Google and Facebook in its country. So at least the US allowed TikTok in the first place, and then they kicked them out later. So in the same vein, to a certain extent, on the political level, Pakistan and India don't get along, allegedly, right? Business-wise, they're best friends. That being said, there's so many apps that are made in India owned by Indian companies that are flourishing in Pakistan just because the content on those apps or the connectivity or the network effects on those apps is a value addition for the people at large. But you don't see the Pakistan government or the regulators in Pakistan say that app is owned by an Indian company, or it's potential that it's possible that the data of our citizens is being harvested by an Indian company and therefore by the Indian government, and so we should ban them. You don't see that rhetoric at all in Pakistan. So we don't really care. It's a matter of figuring out that, like, if I speak to the regulator and I speak to them at length about this, they will come back to me and say, oh, it's because, we're all about transparency. We're all about open market. We want everyone to have a level playing field. But actually what's happening in the back end is they have no idea how to address this in the first place. So they would expect someone from a McKinsey or a Bain to come in as a subject matter expert and tell them this may be a national security risk, or this may be something that you should be concerned about. So yeah, if you think of it just from that perspective, Pakistan and India are supposed to be enemies, and so we don't ban the Indian apps. What would we do with Chinese apps? We would never ban them because they're investing in our country as well.
Right. And I think that in Pakistan's defense, I'm not sure anybody knows how to really regulate this stuff the right way. And the sort of the incentives of short time frames, the 3-month time frame, kind of reminds me of that line. I think it's maybe from Eric Weinstein, who said, like, we look for our blind spots so that we can do business there. We look for these things that we don't completely understand because there are ways that we can generate profit and that sort of thing. So that could be going on, but it sounds like eventually there's too much data and those blind spots don't lose their effect, basically. So
on that point, I often have to testify in front of the Ministry of IT in Pakistan. I often have to testify. Testify is a strong word, but basically they call me in as a subject matter expert to explain various things to them, or just ask a bunch of their questions that they feel that if they ask the media in an open press conference, they look like idiots. So they just, in a closed room, no cameras or anything, they'll ask me questions, and two other subject matter experts show up. And what I often find in those situations is that these people are, I'll put it this way. What I often tell them is that this is the advantage of being a third world country, or this is an advantage of being a country that is not, let's say, technologically savvy. Some countries may look at us and say, "Oh, those people don't even know what a I don't know, digital asset management system is. They don't even know that. So how are they gonna? They don't know what CMS is. They don't know how to do certain things." That being said, we can now look to the West and we can say that because Amazon originated there, and Amazon is now going through all these antitrust issues, when Amazon comes to our country, we know what to expect, as opposed to being blinded by that. Yep. So that's kind of the advantage of being a third world country. And that is what has happened in the last week. Amazon, this is about a week ago, I guess this was like 10th of May, the Pakistan government announced that Amazon is bringing its e-commerce business to Pakistan and its web services business to Pakistan. And so while everyone in the business community was celebrating this, myself and two other people who are, again, I'm a fan of Amazon. I use Prime Video. I enjoy their services. That being said, I know about all the antitrust cases that are against them all over the world, not just in the US, but also in the EU and other things, predatory pricing and undercutting various small businesses and driving a lot of companies out of business. And not just that, but also how everyone knows how they treat their warehouse staff. But that being on the side, I was one of the few people, I am one of the few people in the country that is countering the government narrative, which is all about, the government narrative right now is that we do $25 billion in exports. With Amazon, we're going to do $50 billion in exports. And I'm the only person going out there saying that, first of all, in order to do $50 billion of exports, you need to have a very sophisticated logistical infrastructure, which you do not have as an internal part of your country. Your internal capabilities do not allow you to get there, let alone using Amazon to get there. And then there's a lot of issues with like ports and customs and other things and bribes and all that. Fix all. That's all I said to the commerce minister. I met him a few days ago. I was like, first fix these things and then call in Amazon. Then invite all these foreign companies to come to your country. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they're going to come in, they're going to face these barriers, and they're going to say, screw it. Why should we waste our time here where there's all these barriers and all this corruption? So that being said, let's assume that was even fixed. But my primarily point to them was that we can look at these antitrust cases and we can prepare for what Amazon may or may not do in its go-to-market strategies in year 1, year 2, planning up to year 15, and then we're prepared for it. If nothing else, we're prepared for it, so that we have contingencies in place, and that way we can put policies in place that could sort of protect our small and medium businesses, or provide them with the right funds so that they can pivot early before Amazon comes in. So if I were to speak to some small fashion retailer in the US and ask them that if you could take what you know today and take that back 15 years with regards to Amazon and e-commerce marketplaces, what would you have invested your time and energy and resources into so that you're prepared for the future? And obviously one of those things, Dan, that you and I both know is stop relying on online marketplaces and also invest your energy in an own.com so that you can own that customer data and you can have that CRM to yourself and monetize on that, as opposed to when you deal with an Amazon or an Alibaba and you're putting all your eggs in that basket. Not only are you listing the products with them at a discount sometimes, and then you're giving them a 30% commission on the sales, you're also sort of coerced in a very polite way to spend advertising money within their platform so that your ads and your product can be seen at the discovery at the top within the in-feed. And then on top of that, to make matters worse, if that company thinks that you're not giving them enough money, they're like, I'll just enter that market and I'll undercut them, right? And and then the worst part about all this is you have no ownership of the data that you've acquired. No matter how many tracking pixels you put on that site, if it says Amazon.com/Babar, I don't own that page. Amazon owns it again. No matter how much super data I've acquired, I'm going to be screwed if they one day decide we don't like you, you're off the platform.
Yeah,
I'm going to take Amazon to court. What a joke! I'll be
right,
stuck in
right.
court for
And
years.
we had Rory on for a second time recently, who we both know, and he made that point that Amazon's actually very, very Soviet because there's not a lot of differentiation between the products, and you're kind of just picking whatever they choose to list it in whatever particular way. So it's in a way you can kind of see like throughout history. The biggest capitalists on earth, like the Carnegies of the world, and now maybe the Amazons, actually are kind of big fans of socialism and left politics because it really feeds into their hand better than a chaotic, capitalist system. So it's super interesting. And I want to get more into e-commerce, but to take kind of a sidetrack real quick, you said something really compelling about the regulators and the idea of, regulators in Pakistan not understanding like what a CMS is or what any of this technology is. And I think the US is not a lot better, and I think in the US, we have a lot of our debates over demographics, over the fact that the boomers have quote unquote held on to power for so long. And that, you can just look at any political stage in the US and it's mostly older people, not a lot of young blood going into that. And that's the problem. That, according to a lot of people, that's the central problem. So my impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Pakistan is a younger country demographically than Western Europe or the US. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. How does that affect the way you see this panning out, the way you see regulation? Assuming I'm right about that, and maybe I'm not. So let me know. Yeah.
Yeah. To your earlier point about about the U.S. having politicians and people in power who are old, I remember like the example that pops up in my mind is when Sundar Pichai was being was being grilled by Congress or Senate. I'm not exactly sure which group it was. But then someone in the audience asked, someone from the panel asked, someone held up an iPhone and they're like, "Why does your device track me?" And he had to explain that, "Hey man, we don't make iPhones." Like that for me was the biggest facepalm. I was like, that's basic information, man. Like the Prime Minister of Pakistan knows this, that Apple makes iPhones and not Google. But that was really hilarious for me. So I experience that every now and then. People don't understand how WhatsApp works. These the same group of people, like the people who are regulating the social media apps in Pakistan, don't know the difference between WhatsApp and FaceTime. They think they're one and the same. So it's a challenge and a half. But to your second part of your question about the youth population, it's something like 60% of our country is under the age of, I would say, 30, which sounds great in theory, and it sounds great. And I've been a silent voice, sort of like hammering on. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't sound impressive to me, to be honest, because this is one of those things where people talk about quantity over quality. There's a lot of this all over the world, and you've been, I'm sure, experienced in your world where people are talking about impressions, but they're not talking about conversions. And so when I look at this number where someone says that, oh, it's so great that 60% of your population is under the age of 30 or 25 or whatever the number is, it's definitely under 30. So my follow up to that is how many of that 30%, 60% is employed, and that too employed with good and high paying jobs. Because if you look at, I'm giving an example from the US, but if you look at the work of Professor Scott Galloway from New York Stern, one of the pandemics, qualitative pandemics that he talks about is the pandemic of young white men who are virgins, and because of their lack of, I would say, I don't want to get too crude, but generally speaking, if they have lack of progress in their social standing, whether that means in the form of securing a mate for life, or that means in terms of the work that they do, or in terms of the fulfillment that they have in their life, they will turn towards extremist and right-wing elements, or extreme left-wing elements, and become extremists in their own way, whether that means picking up a weapon to shoot up a school, or that means doing other kinds of violent and absolutely horrendous acts. And right. So we have that bit in Pakistan where you have this gigantic, pool of people. There's 200 million people country, with 60% is under a certain age. That's 120 million people. I would honestly guess that 75% of that population is unemployed or miserable in one way or the other. And so people will automatically revert to a victim mentality. And then they go into a state of, I need someone to blame because I've been taught my whole life that I'm exceptional. And so I need someone to blame for the state of my life is right now. So from an app business perspective, when I speak to these Chinese companies coming into the country and I ask them why Pakistan, and I say it with extreme skepticism. I don't say thanks for coming in. Why Pakistan? I don't go. I'm the exact opposite. And so they cite this number. They're like, oh, you have 120 million people in your country, 80 million of whom have a smartphone. That's a great market for us to capture right now. And then in the next 15 years, hopefully they'll be worth something. That sounds great and everything, but the ARPU today, the average revenue per user today, is hardly a dollar. So by the time you get a return on investment, or I would say by the time you get break even, within a certain segment, within that large segment, would be like 10, 15 years, as opposed to going after niche audiences, which is what our publication does. So as probably mentioned in the introduction, I work for a publication that covers a lot of topics. And I would say we're basically the Wall Street Journal of Pakistan. We have an affiliation deal with the Wall Street Journal where we represent them and vice versa. And so I'm their advertising reporter, and every single reporter works for a very niche industry. So we have a niche audience and we have a small audience. So I would say we have about 300 of the 200 million people in the whole country on a monthly basis. About 1 million of them read our publication, but those million are the people who run the Pakistan equivalent of Wall Street. So it doesn't sound impressive to have only 1 million out of 200 million, but those million people control, I would say, $150 billion worth of inventory on an annual basis. So someone coming up to me and saying, I've got 100 million subscribers or 100 million viewers or 100 million likes on Facebook, my only question to them is the ARPU that they're getting per user. And that's usually in the cents, as opposed to in our side, it's in the $1,000 to $5,000 range. So it sounds impressive, but at the end of the day, you have to ask the real questions. And I'm sure you do that as well in your practice, where if someone says to you, hey, I'd like to draw a million website visitors to my site. And you're like, yeah, I could do that for like 0.001 CPM and from Indonesia, like a target audience that not even of your concern, but hardly any of them will convert. Your bounce rate's going to be through the roof. Your site's probably going to get flagged by Google's Schema for being potentially driving home bots. So it right. Sounds good on paper to have 1 million people visit your site, but if those are not qualified audiences, then what's the point? And so I look at it the same way where, yes, you have 60% under a certain age group, but then what is the quality of their life? And then you can make a determine whether this is a good thing or a bad thing.
Right. And there's a lot to get into there. And I think that there's a lot to be said for niches, and most, I've observed that with our business and all over the place. I think that there's a lot of power in that, and a lot of fewer shared experience and that sort of thing. And those things are tied together. And to go back to the demographic thing a little bit, and I think that's been pretty well diagnosed in the US at this point, that, you have this massive group of kind of like disillusioned, primarily young men. Then they're going to go towards extremism, whether that's an Antifa or an alt-right, or just languishing in a basement playing video games or something like that. So not to get hung up on that too much, but I'm just curious, like, how do you see that playing out in Pakistan? Is it Islamic extremism? Is it something else? Like, how is that? What are people in those positions kind of grasping towards?
Sure. It used to be Islamic extremism, but then the army really stepped up a few years ago, and they basically went up and they purged all these people. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. They went to certain areas where they knew the worst people were, and they just purged them out of existence. They didn't capture them or anything. They said, we have to end their lives, because if we put them in jail, they'll be martyrs, and then they'll have sympathizers, and that'll just make things worse. So we had to put an end to their existence. So they did that. That was done about a decade ago. And since then, things have been pretty, I would say, I look at the crime statistics in the US and New York and other places as well. So I would say we're, quite reasonable in terms of the crime numbers and the statistics on that front. Things are good from that perspective. If people are driven towards an extremist narrative, the narratives are usually on the premise of, we need to overthrow the government in order to be, I would say, be our own country, as opposed to right now, Pakistan relies a lot on foreign donations, loans from the IMF, investments from companies like China, countries like China, primarily with Belt and Road, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, other influences. So a lot of external foreign direct investment with a lot of catch-22s attached to it that is governing Pakistan right now. And obviously that impacts how well or how little we progress as a country. So it's one of those things where people who, I'll put it this way, today, if today, if you and I map out all the goals of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we go to Bill and we put on our Thanos glove and we snap our finger and all the problems get solved in the world. Do you think Bill will take us up on that offer? And Bill's an extreme example, but any philanthropist or any NGO in the world will say no to that offer because their whole business relies on getting those donations. And for every $100 that you donate to an NGO, $89 goes to the NGO itself, $11 goes to the cause itself. Every single audit in the world has confirmed this. $11 out of the $100 that you spend on an NGO goes to the actual cause that you actually wanted to spend. 89 goes into administrative fees, marketing fees, and other fees that go within the NGO itself. So it's in their vested interest for the problems to continue. In the same vein, Pakistan is a strategic asset to various types of countries all over the world. So China, Russia, and big parts of the Middle East is predominantly a part of this. And so from a geopolitical standpoint, there's a lot of countries that are pouring money into Pakistan that have a lot to gain with things remaining the same. And so there's the political swell that you were alluding to earlier. Right now, there's one group that says we need foreign direct investors coming into the country so that we can survive and thrive and possibly innovate in the future. And the other group of people who have, let's say, perhaps spent time in the government, who have seen how many roadblocks are created or how many golden handcuffs are created as a result of taking this money. And there's a lot of catch-22s attached to it. They're saying we need to be independent from this group of people. And that's the latter group of people who've not really gotten any self-actualization from the corporate careers that they pursue or any kind of jobs that they have. And so this gigantic student movement towards freeing the country, again, quote unquote, freeing the country from the shackles of foreign direct investors, especially the ones that come with a catch-22. Because it's one thing to invest in the country and say, I like to build up the real estate industry. It's another thing to invest and say that I'm investing so that you don't create the microchips that go into a smart car.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And with that, I think it sounds like obviously there's lots of powers involved and things remaining the same. And journalism is all about things, shaking things up and creating transparency so things can get better, at least ideally. So with that, what's it like being a journalist in Pakistan? Is how easy or hard is it for you to do what you do? How safe do you feel, and so on?
Sure. There's about 3,000 publications in the entire country, and through brute force, all these publications had to go digital. It wasn't like they thought, I think digital is going to take off. Let's invest our time and money there. They're like, nope, that's not exactly what happened. People started reading the news on Facebook and Google, and then the publications were like, we got to create a .com or we're going to lose readers. And so that's the landscape right now. 3,000, I would say, publications. And when I say publications, I also mean broadcasters. So you'll see a lot of the way CNN is, as an example. So if there's an organization such as CNN in Pakistan, they'll have content that you can watch on TV, on an OTT device, on your smartphone, obviously. They'll have a website where you can read the content, and they'll also have a newspaper, a physical print, paper newspaper, and they'll have a radio station as well. And that's generally the schema that's applied across the whole country. And slowly, we're hopefully getting at the end of the year direct to home devices. And I often joke to the people in Pakistan that we're going to get those devices on the 31st of June, which is another way of saying it's never going to happen. So that's where the market is right now. Your question was where it's headed, if I'm not mistaken.
That too, but also just what it's like to do what you do. In terms of, it sounds like there's lots of powerful forces that want, like you said, want everything to be the same. And I'm wondering what the process of journalism is like for you. I know in other places, in other developing countries, it's not always safe being a journalist. So I love to hear what your experience is like.
Sure. Well, the thing about me is that I actually come from the advertising industry. I spent about 70 years in client servicing within advertising agencies. So dealing with all types of clients, from government all the way to government, military, and obviously for-profit organizations. So having experienced that and then jumping into journalism, I kind of went reverse in my career on a lot of things. But jumping from there into journalism wasn't that hard as a jump. Because of my first journalistic job was with with the Haymarket Media Group in Singapore for a publication called Campaign Asia, which is under Campaign. So the US, they have Campaign US or PR Week and others. And then from there, I went to an American publication called Branding in Asia. I was with them for 2 years, and then COVID happened. So a lot of things got affected because of that. And since then, I've been with this publication called Profit. And so across these 4 years that I've been with these 3 different publications across 3 different countries, I've been covering the advertising industry or in the Asia Pacific region, but then also with Pakistan. And over the past 1 year, I primarily focused all my attention on Pakistan. And so in that way, of the 400,000 people in Pakistan who can consider themselves journalists, whether they're citizen journalists or fully employed journalists, there's only 3 in the whole country that cover the advertising industry. And so this is a question I often bring up with people, where I tell them that if you pick up the beats of various reporters across the entire industry, the first largest beat is political. The second largest beat is entertainment, which is everything to do with your shows and your all types of programming and shows. The third largest is fashion lifestyle, so covering what fashion products have been rolled out and how they look and how they wear and all those other things as attached to that. Again, I'm very ignorant about it, so I'm not going to go too much into detail about what goes into fashion journalism. And then so on and so forth. And the economy is somewhere on the 8th place. And then way down, I guess, on 800th place is advertising journalism. And then I point this out to people quite a bit, where I tell them that, we have a reporter for the smartphone industry. We have a reporter for the pharmaceutical industry. We have a reporter for the FMCG industry. We don't have a single reporter, aside from myself and 2 others, for the advertising industry. And why is that? Because our business models as broadcasters and publishers relies on the media agencies in the country. And all the deals in Pakistan all the advertising deals, at least in Pakistan, are done through the media agency. So if I own a publication called babar.com, the only way I'm going to get money in terms of go to market with least amount of friction, least amount of barriers to getting my cash flows in check. P&L one thing, but getting my cash flows in check, the best relationship I can do right now is build a relationship with the media agency. The media agency will come to me, or I will go to them, and I'll say to them that my rate card says $1,000 per impression. I'm giving a very bad example. No one in the world, I think, has $1,000 CPM. But let's say it's $1,000 CPM. I'll tell the media agency, you will keep 45% of this for every, so and so slab of business that you bring in. And that's how the business works in Pakistan. So imagine being a publisher writing about media agencies, good or bad. That's a big red flag. Even right now in my current role and all the roles I've had within the journalistic space, it's happened many times where I've written an article about, let's say I've written the article about Google. It's not happened yet, but let's say I've written the article about Google. Google's media agency will get in touch with me and say, or get in touch with my editor and say that you have to delete this article, you have to edit this article, you have to amend this article, you have to change something because my client is unhappy, right? That's the media agency calling me because their client is unhappy with the article that I wrote about them, or maybe the industry or whatever regulatory landscape stories. Now imagine the media agency calling me to say that we're upset because you upset us.
Yeah,
that's a whole other, the strain of that conversation. Because even in the first example, media agency is saying, yeah, I know this call sucks. I know it's really annoying, but my client wants me to relay this information A, B, and C. But the second scenario is like, hey man, what the hell? Don't bite the hand that feeds you. So because of that reality, very few publications in Pakistan can do advertising journalism. As a result of that, when you have, again, like I mentioned, there's only 3 of us. One of the publications is called Aurora. The URL is aurora.com. Aurora.dawn.com. Dawn as in the rising dawn. The second one is called Synergizer. I don't know how I think it's a made up word. I'm not mistaken, but it's synergizer.com. And then the third is us, which is a convoluted profit.pakistantoday.com.pk.
Yeah, we'll get the last one linked up. But I guess in the U.S. it's and elsewhere for years it was kind of the advertiser model, kind of like the one that you described, and then more recently it shifted, especially for like New York Times and others, Bloomberg's, to a reader funded model. And I always thought that would be better, because the people that are getting the news are paying for it. There's fewer bad incentives with advertisers. But I think what we've gotten and the criticism that this model's created is that now there's kind of this incentive to create these echo chambers, that are perpetuated by social networks where you're essentially like incentivized just to create articles that make people happy or that feed into a particular point of view. So for the New York Times, it's going to be, center left; for Wall Street Journal, center right, and so on from there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, is there a model that you think is more ideal? Is there a right way to do this? Is it always just going to be a mess?
I have to admit, Dan, I have never to this day, up to the point that you just said this, heard the counter argument against subscriptions. Because our publication is driving, pushing for subscriptions at a massive scale, and succeeding to a certain extent. I would say about 30% of our revenue is from recurring subscriptions that are coming in, both corporate and individual. So that's a positive on our side, and that's a big part of why we're able to do this sort of risky journalism with advertising and media industries. That being said, I've never heard it before about the echo chambers, but I can see what you're referring to. For the most part, businesses in Pakistan want to rely on the advertising oriented revenue model, just because not only is it a steady source of income, but also on top of that, most of the organizations right now are relying on advertisers because the advertiser is also funding the content in a lot of cases. So it's one thing to having your ad, your client's ad, and giving an example. Let's say there's a Dell laptop ad inside your publication or your TV or whatever. Now it's a whole other story where Dell is coming to you and saying that I will create a program, a piece of content, and you can air that content on your TV show, your YouTube channel, whatever the medium is, and you can say it's by you. But it's my product deeply integrated in there. Dell laptops just happen to be used and all that. So there's a couple of scenarios of that type. But what was your exact question? If I'm just trying to understand.
No, I think you kind of answered it. Where it's the subscription model sounds like the way to get rid of that problem, and I think it kind of ties back to what we started to talk about with niches and the fact that your niche is investigating or dealing with the advertising industry and that sort of thing. So that just might be where it's heading, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because then from that point, I would say that in Pakistan, there's a lot of, again, I was recently having a similar conversation with someone, and when I took like 2 minutes to reflect on my answer, which is a horrible thing to do on a live panel. But I essentially just came back to them and I said that I think it's a difference between, again, this is a hunch. I think it's a difference between if you're dealing with a digital native or a digital immigrant. A digital immigrant, when you're telling them these things, will say that, the way I've been doing things is the way it's always been working. And so I've no invested interest to change anything or invest in the future or amend my ways. And on top of that, they'll also say that if I go with the media agency, or if I go for the advertising model, I have to go to like 5 media agencies to get like $1 billion worth of revenue. If I flip it over to the subscription side, now I have to hit 1 million touch points.
Yeah.
I'm assuming my subscription rate is $1,000 a year, which is still absurdly high, right?
Right.
So they feel like it's a lot of effort to do the million touch points versus the 5 touch points. That being said, what they don't realize is that the million touch points, through the million touch points, your cash flows will probably be a lot better than from the media agency touch point, because again, payment cycles in Pakistan are pretty bad. Something that's promised in 30 days comes in 45 days. So, and that can impact not only your own OPEX, but it can in fact impact how quickly or how efficiently you can disperse salaries to your employees, as a very tiny micro example.
Yeah, and I think the other point is that it's just fewer cooks in the kitchen. If you're going off the advertising model, you've got to make both advertisers and readers happy versus just making readers happy, get them to keep paying you. So there's something really simple about that. And to tie this back to
when you deal with, if I could add on one more point, when you deal with the advertiser model, the way it works in Pakistan right now is deals are made and enforced about 12 to 15 months consecutively. So if I bring on a media agency today, or a media agency that I deal with right now in the month of I'm blanking right now, but in the month of May, if I bring in a media agency and I tell them that from the 1st of June 2021 till the 31st of May 2022, this is the deal that we have. This is the revenue that you're going to generate. That's going to be locked in, and even if the client advertiser cancels at any point in time, I will be able to retain at least 30% of that agreed amount, because we understand there's an opportunity cost with me making the agreement in the first place, right? Because of media slots and limited media inventory. The same cannot be said on the subscription side. If today the subscriber says that I don't want to continue my subscription, let's say they've paid for a year, $1,000, and after 8 months they're like, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to do this beyond the 9th month, right? That person's $750 will be credited, will be debited, but $250 will go back to the customer for the remaining 3 months. And so, if I'm not mistaken with the math, but so you have that sort of cashback approach with the subscriber side, but you don't have that on the advertiser side. So there's a lot of valid reasons, I would say, why broadcasters don't want to change things the way they are. That being said, when they look at publications like ours and they look at the ARPU, at the end of the day, it does boil down to this, right? How much money are you making per audience member, per eyeball that you've been able to attract? When I say eyeball, obviously I mean a pair of eyes. So it's about how many eyeballs that you've been able to attract and how much money you're making against those. If that is declining, if your user base is increasing and your average revenue per user is declining, there's a red flag to be raised. But people are not raising that red flag right now. But what's happening is with these apps that are coming into the market that are able to, like, for example, every single year, one of the big apps in Pakistan releases a report that implies, without saying it very clearly, but implies how much money they're making in Pakistan. So then the broadcasters are like, this company is making $100 million a year from 5 employees. We're making $10 million a year from 1,000 employees. We should be ashamed of ourselves. Yeah. And on top of it, in the end, we've been in the market for 50 years, and these people just came in like 3 years ago. So we should be ashamed of ourselves. So that is definitely happening. It's one of those things where, Dan, when COVID happened in Pakistan, I said something very politically incorrect, but it turns out I was right. Like now we're 18 months or 15 months later after COVID. And I said this at the time when I was speaking to one of the leaders of the government, that people in Pakistan will not take social distancing and bring a mask and all these other things. They will not take it seriously until someone in their family dies from COVID. That's the reality. People in Pakistan do not take anything seriously until they've been shot in the kneecaps. No one takes, and this has been mirrored in other parts of the world as well. Where in Pakistan, people didn't believe COVID was real. They're like, it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy to keep our masks on. And I'm like, you are an extremist psychopath who wants women to wear a veil all the time. And someone has come and said that everyone's going to wear a veil all the time, and you're still against it. So I'm like, this is a win-win for you guys. You're nuts, but this is a win-win for you. But they're like, no, this is a conspiracy against us. And people Bill Gates is going to take a chip, put that in the vaccine, and then inject it into us. He's going to track us everywhere. And I'm like, you idiot. You paid $100 for a smartphone that's doing that already. You paid for that. So yeah. Bill Gates doesn't have the time and money to track you constantly. You're useless in the grand scheme of things. So that's what it is in Pakistan. People are as people are losing business, I would say 8% a year. When I speak to broadcasters, the large broadcasters in Pakistan, across the board, the average number that I've gotten out of them is that on an annual basis, if you keep the foreign exchange constant, and if you keep year-on-year growth constant, they're losing 8% of revenue on a year-by-year basis, and they attribute to the fact that they didn't innovate in time when they should have, and when they could have. And that being said, even as they realize this today, they're reluctant to do it because they're hoping things will go back to the way they were. Right. So these people deserve to be wiped out from the industry ecosystem, and rightfully so, because they're losing relevance. They're unable to prove their audiences are real. They're unable to prove their value to the advertiser in general. They can say branding and top of funnel all they want, but if you're watching a 60-minute show and 40 minutes of it is the show itself and 20 minutes is the ads, and each ad is 30 seconds, you're watching 40 ads. How are you going to retain the first ad? How? That's impossible. Yeah. Right? But on digital, with retargeting and micro-targeting and frequency capping and other aspects of how our targeting is done, you can do that much more efficiently, and you go out of your way not to annoy the person. So like, if I see the same damn ad from TikTok one more time, I mean, I've reached out to the person who leads TikTok in Pakistan. I'm like, I'll pay you money so I don't have to see this stupid TikTok ad on YouTube again, because they don't have a frequency cap. But you can do those things on digital, right? You can't necessarily do those on analog. And so you can see advertisers shifting in that direction as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think like going back to the niche stuff, and this is something that Cal Newport, if you know him, has talked a lot about recently in the U.S. And it seems like there was an era, X years ago when it seemed like the Facebooks of the world and these various social apps were just, just super strong and impossible to dislodge and everything. And it seems like that's kind of changing now, where you have more and more niche apps springing up. You have less that these apps can do, especially with the Apple, Facebook standoff and all this sort of thing. And I think Cal's take on it was that there could be a world coming up pretty soon where there's just a bunch where you just kind of sign on to your own niche app with a cohort of people kind of like you and get what you need out of it. And it's one of these things where I think he's also made the point where, like, the biggest industries that we've seen in the 20th century, like the U.S. steels, the Standard Oils, and those sort of things. If you turn them off overnight, the world would be turned upside down. But you turn off Facebook overnight, things aren't going to change that much. Maybe Amazon and Google a little bit different. There's more utility. There's more kind of like day-to-day utility to those things. So I'd love to hear your take on that and kind of like where you think things are going.
That's exactly what happened a few days ago. There was a few days ago. I would say a few weeks ago, there was some protests in Pakistan, and from a good place, from intentionally a good place, but good intentions, bad execution. So from a good intentions perspective, the media regulator in Pakistan, the telecom regulator in Pakistan, shut down a bunch of apps, and it was a blanket. It was blanket. So it was like, we want to shut down Instagram, so we also shut down Facebook, and we want to shut down YouTube, so we also shut down all Google services. So every Google service was blocked for, I would say, like 4 or 5 hours. So from a utility standpoint, that's exactly what happened, where people who rely on Google apps or apps that rely on Google Maps, for example, right? There's some navigation apps in the country that are replicas of Uber that rely entirely on Google Maps, telling them where the traffic is, where it isn't. And so as a result of that, your route is decided according to that as well. So from that perspective, people are like, man, my commute got affected because of this, because I lost access to these apps. My commute became more expensive, or I wasted more time in traffic, or other things really, really badly impacted that. And on top of that, for example, this was around, I think this was just before Ramadan or in the middle of Ramadan. I think it was in the middle of Ramadan. So there's some people, let's say, who were learning the Quran again, or learning a certain prayer again. And so they needed that YouTube app to be open so they could hear it on their drive home. So that helps the recitation or the memorization in some ways. And so that got affected. But no one talked about Facebook in the same way. People were like, I lost touch with my friends for a few hours. No big deal. But these utility apps that allow me to learn, absorb new information, or at least pass the time. Like, for example, Candy Crush is big in Pakistan. People use it on their commutes. You can see people in the train or in the bus. Sorry, we don't have trains, but you can see people in the buses or in taxis playing Candy Crush as a way to pass time for 30 minutes commute. You don't, if people lose that, they get agitated. Yeah. And on top of the fact that they're fasting, so it makes it even worse. So we definitely have a very good relationship in terms of utility with Google, because of Google Maps and YouTube and other similar apps. Gmail, obviously, pretty big. I mean, for me, for example, Gmail and Google Search. So Gmail within that Google Docs and Google Sheets and all, within the Google Suite, and then obviously YouTube and all these, and search as well. These are essential for my job as a journalist, and any person in any kind of white collar role in Pakistan uses these apps. A lot of the business email accounts in Pakistan are built on Google. So people are signing into Gmail and they're signing in with their business accounts, and we have the same setup. A lot of people have the same. Like, very few people have Outlook from that perspective, right? Yeah. And so when those services were shut down for 3-4 hours, a lot of people weren't able to access their emails, and so the work even stopped. So people just were told, like, imagine you run an organization in Pakistan that's 1,000 employees who are white collar, and you're used to sending out mass emails to them. Sending an email at salesschema.com, and that email goes to every single employee of the 1,000 employees. Now 1,000 employees in 4 different cities have been shut down. You have to pick up the phone physically and say, hey guys, because the email isn't working, let's just go home. Yeah. You haven't picked up that phone in years. So in that way, people started like, so in a way, it was like a way of reinforcing to people that these apps are a part of our daily life, and we should be grateful to them.
Yeah,
So
and it's yeah, exactly. And I think the point's been made with the alternatives with the social apps that are less important is that like Facebook kind of cut off their own legs because they're the way that they could defend themselves was the network effect and the fact that all your friends were on it. But then they got the news feed, which isn't necessarily about your friends, it's just about whatever the algorithm says you like. And now it's like, well, what's the point? You might as well go to the whatever niche app it best fits your needs, which is, and hence you have TikTok and a million others and so on. So, yeah.
To that point, one of the things that I missed out, and it just occurred to me right now, is that the one utility app that WhatsApp does that Facebook does own is called WhatsApp. And I don't know how popular it is in the US, but in Pakistan it's pretty popular.
Yeah.
It's like pre-installed in most phones. And so from that perspective, even when WhatsApp went down, that affected a lot of people as well.
Yeah.
Again, so within the app, Facebook suite of apps, WhatsApp was the only one that really affected people. People didn't give a shit about losing Instagram and Facebook, but within Google, when people lost access to Gmail, Google Maps, YouTube, for Google Photos, like you've uploaded your photos onto a cloud with Google Photos, and not necessarily store them on your phone. That affected people quite a bit. I know a couple of production businesses in Pakistan that were in the middle again because this block that I'm referring to happened like within minutes. Like there was no heads up. So a production company that has just finished a TVC shoot, finished the edit of it, uploading the file onto Google Drive that is shared by the whole organization, so that someone else can download it and edit it, and so it's ready for a TVC. That whole production cycle got delayed by 2 to 3 days because of this. So in that way, people kind of looked at each other like, is there no other option? Then obviously now conversations have happened about how Zoom can be used for this, or WeTransfer and other tools can be used as alternatives. So people have like that kind of information has been way more popular. But on the whole, these are considered to be utilitarian in one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, big wrenches get thrown in the gears when those things go down. So, Var, I think we could probably go on for another 3 hours about all sorts of things, but want to be respectful of your time and everything, and hopefully we'll get you back on. I guess just to kind of finish things up, I'd love to hear what are you working on that you can talk about? What's going on in the next couple of weeks? What's on your beat?
Yeah, sure. What's on the beat right now is that, like I've mentioned before, we don't have an active or a proactive regulator per se around the advertising agencies in Pakistan. And advertisers in Pakistan have become very used to the idea that Facebook and Google are both the media that they spend their money on and the measurement service that tells them whether that media worked or not. So they've got used to that sort of walled garden approach. And as a result of that, we have a lot of advertising agencies in Pakistan that are going into a lot of what could be considered a conflict of interest space. So there's a couple of advertising agencies in Pakistan that are very largely established that are, importing the set-top boxes for direct to home, putting programming into that, putting original content into that. So they become a sort of Netflix provider, and they're pushing for CTV, they're pushing for direct to home, they're pushing for the democratization of TV-based advertising, primarily through CTV in the country. And if you try to do this in any other Western market, people would say conflict of interest because you are the media agency, but you're also the media owner and you're also the media distributor. Because we don't have that in Pakistan, a couple of media agencies in Pakistan are doing this. But one of the biggest media agencies in Pakistan right now that I would recommend, if anyone from any of the markets that are your listeners and your viewers, that if they're interested in entering the Pakistan market, they should definitely check out a company called Z2C Limited. The website is z2zlimited.com, the letter Z2C. So zoo to cat, limited.com. And this is a technology first company that is it represents the second largest media agency in Pakistan, right after Group M. So like this is the company that gives Group M a hard time in Pakistan. So that tells you a lot about how powerful they are. They're primarily a tech company. They own an app. They own a service that is a universal payment gateway, and as a result of that, you can clearly understand the kind of data that they have on hand in terms of actionable commercial data tied to consumer purchases. So you understand how strong they're on that suite. They have access to 5 agencies in Pakistan that control 80% of the telecom market and a lot of the other markets as well. So of the 5 telecom operators in Pakistan, 4 of them are their clients. So they're very strong on that front as well. They have the affiliate partnership with Publicis Group, 3 agencies of Publicis Group, namely Spark, MediaVest, and Starcom. They have a relationship with them as well. And so they have access to a large variety of industry verticals from technology to marketing to e-commerce, and even now fintech. And they are a key player in the market from a go-to-market perspective. So what I've seen over the past, I would say 6 months, is that any gigantic tech company entering into the market, if they want to speed up their go-to-market approach in terms of not only getting product adoption, but also getting the least amount of friction in terms of the regulatory or the corporate landscape, they go to Z2C. Because again, there's no regulator, that this is a large organization, they move very fast, their leader is extremely agile, minded person. His name is Rehan Merchant. And so if you want to move very, very quickly, you get in touch with this organization and you tell them that I sell this software, I sell this hardware, I sell this particular piece of, a variable that is part of the marketing or advertising ecosystem. And here's a deal structure that works for me from a reseller perspective. Can you help us? And they'll handle everything for you for that. And they operate from the reason, again, there's a big reason that Chinese companies love them is because they operate on a, what's it called? It's called slice. Basically, they operate on an output model. So they won't take money from you until they've achieved their goals. So there's no retainer fee, there's no commission or anything like that. It's just it's called outcome. So outcome model basically means that if you have an end goal in mind, we will only take money from you once we've achieved that end goal. We will not take money from you from the beginning to the end. We'll have lots of conversations. We'll do segmentation and strategy, design, creative, media deployment. We'll do all those things on our own dime. But when you get that sales results at the end of the day, when you hit that $100 million mark, we have agreed upon that we will get 45%, 15%, whatever that number is of that. And that is what we've, that is the outcome model that we want to approach. So a lot of the Chinese companies really love that about them, but they're saying that we can enter a market, in spirit for a year. And at the end of the year, when whatever revenue that we generate, what we would have eventually paid the media agents anyway, we're paying them at the end of the year as opposed to paying them every single month and hoping for a result at the end of the year. So in that way, they're a really strong contender in the market. So if you're definitely entering the Pakistan market, this is the one company I recommend, not just for the reasons I just mentioned right now, but also because of how fast they are. The agility is there's no agency in Pakistan that come close. And the funny thing is they're led by a digital immigrant, but the way it's run, you think it's all run by digital natives.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and you heard it here. If you're trying to get into Pakistan, CDC Limited, and hopefully learn some Urdu at some point as well. That probably helps.
The whole Pakistan market, the whole white collar industry in Pakistan speaks English.
Yeah, English.
We're colonized, obviously everyone speaks English.
Right.
Look at, all the communications within the organization are in English. You need to be able to speak English to work at these companies. Urdu is spoken from the perspective of possibly communicating from a market research standpoint. But otherwise, everyone's speaking English constantly. Proposals are in English. Emails are in English. Everything's in English. Everything you can think of is in English. I can think of very few things that are happening in the native tongue. Yeah,
that's interesting as well. So, Babar, how can people follow what you're up to and get in touch and all that good stuff?
LinkedIn is the best way to reach me. I have a very unique name, so it's not going to be hard to find me. And it's a very nice pink image that I use pretty much everywhere. So my full name is Babar Khan Javed. It's hopefully in the title. It's also in the description. Just search that and look in my LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach me. And then obviously drop me an email at babarkj@gmail.com. That's my personal email address. And you can reach me there. I have corporate email addresses as well, but because of the massive amount of emails I get there, it's very hard to go through and sift through, find the right one. And press releases and pitches and all those other things. So reaching me on my personal address is much better. So these are the two best ways to reach me: LinkedIn and LinkedIn to follow me on my work and my Gmail in order to reach me and hopefully collaborate in one way or the other.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And let's do it again.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.